So I found this really interesting study from Resume Lab where they surveyed 1,000 employees to see if they would subvert their boss if they had the opportunity. They also asked employees if they felt they were more qualified than their boss and what they would do differently if they were in charge. So I thought we'd just go over it really quick. I can give you my thoughts about the data and we can get some insights from it. Oh, by the way, this data is from December 2019, so about a month old as of the recording of this video. All right, do you believe you're more qualified than your manager? 21.7% said yes. Now, I have to admit, I was surprised by this one, but not because it was 20%, because I thought it was going to be like double that, at least. I thought that would be much, much higher. It does look like it tends to be higher with remote workers. They said 1 in 3. Of course, remote employees are a bit more removed from the day-to-day office and may have a different sense of their manager's responsibilities, but a sense of qualification may also stem from their increased productivity when working from home. So that makes a ton of sense. 61% of employed Americans believe they can handle their manager's daily responsibilities. Listen, I think that's probably true. I think most employees could probably take on their manager's responsibilities. However, maybe not on day one. There's going to be a bit of a gap, a bit of a learning curve, if you will, when you go from individual contributor to manager. And here's the thing, guys, like most managers, if they're good managers, if you have a good boss, you do not know all the things that they're doing. You don't, because it's not your business. It is not your business to know all the things your boss is doing, right? And in fact, the really good ones, they're going to shield you from a lot of the stuff they're doing. They're going to shield you from the nonsense, the politics, the drama, all this stuff, because that's not part of your role. They want you to focus on what you're there to do and what you're there to accomplish. And so they don't want you to necessarily be involved with the negotiating and stuff that they have to do on the side. So yes, I believe that most people could probably step up and handle their manager's responsibilities, but don't assume you know everything your manager is doing. It just, usually you don't. Percentage who believe they're more qualified than their manager based on company size. I was also a little surprised at this one, but it made sense the more I thought about it. So they find that if employees work in a mid-sized company, they're more likely to think that they're more qualified than their manager, whereas larger companies, only 20% of people think they're more qualified than their boss. I thought that was going to be a lot bigger, but they explain it in the study. Let's see, the number of employees in management between different sized companies is likely responsible for more or less interaction between superiors and their employees. In large companies, the CEOs and other executives are less likely to show their face around the office or interact daily with lower level employees, whereas this may be more common when the company is mid-sized. So essentially, they're seeing more of their boss, they're seeing more of their boss's boss, they may be even seeing more of their boss's boss's boss in those mid-sized companies, and when you see more of people, it can be a lot easier to pick out those imperfections, if you will. All right, gaps in belief. 24% of men believed they were more qualified than their manager, but only 18.7% of women said the same. Some might argue this is a prime example of the confidence gap. Listen, I think this is a stretch at best to say this is an example of the confidence gap. And I actually I think there are a lot of factors that go into the confidence gap. And what you need to hear is that, you know, it is true that men tend to be just a little bit more confident than women, but it's not a huge gap. And in fact, look at this. This is not even that big of a gap. 19% of women compared to 24% of men. So men are 5% more likely to think they're more qualified than the boss. 5% is not a whole heck of a lot. Listen, they also linked to this other website, and they actually didn't have a lot of information about the confidence gap on this website, but they did have this one line that I wanted to point out and just take some time with. According to one study from Advances in Physiology Education, men tend to overestimate their intelligence and academic abilities, while women tend to underestimate both. Okay, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. I'm stepping up onto my soapbox, all right? Ladies, I would rather you every day of the flippin' week, overestimate your intelligence and academic abilities than underestimate it. And in order to do that, if you struggle with your confidence, if you feel like you have imposter syndrome, come on, man. Like, we have so many resources to be able to help you. You have to want to change that. And if you want to change that, you have books, you have podcasts, you have coaches, you have mentors, you have teachers, you have videos on YouTube, you have programs on the internet. There are all sorts of different ways to boost your confidence. But you have to want to. You have to do the work. And there are so many reasons why people struggle with confidence. It could be any number of things I'm not going to go into on this video. But we can't change the past. We can't go back and unwire everything that was done. The only thing we can do to move forward. If you want to get more confident, if you want to see yourself as that person that is worthy of that boss position, you have all the resources in the world, many of them on the internet for free that you can utilize. In fact, women have more resources than men do in this regard. I was interviewing this guy for my No BS podcast. It's up at nobsatwork.com. And I interviewed him specifically because he struggles with imposter syndrome, or he did struggle with it. And he was looking for resources to help him out. And the only resources he could find were specifically for women. And he didn't want to co-opt their resources. He felt guilty about that. But listen, you have so many different things. You have so many different things. If you're struggling with your confidence, please seek out help, because you don't need to be that way. It's just completely unnecessary. And that's not to say it's going to be easy. It's not like a quick fix, but you can do the work. You can boost your confidence. Okay, stepping off my soapbox now. Let's talk about generation. 23% of millennials thought they were more qualified than their boss, compared to 21% of Gen X and 17% of baby boomers. I suspect that this has more to do with years of experience and wisdom that you gain when you have those extra years of experience than it does specifically to have to do with generation. I bet if we looked at those boomers when they were, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, they had less experience, they were, maybe a little bit overly confident in their intelligence and education and abilities, their numbers probably would have been higher then too. But guess what? A lot of those boomers have now been in management positions, and they realize, listen, this isn't like as easy as I thought it was, or this has so much more involved than I thought it was. So I'm going to bet that's a reflection of experience level, not necessarily the specific generations. And by job level, they find that first level manager positions and mid-level managers are significantly more likely to think they're more qualified than their boss. Probably again, because they have more exposure to those upper levels of management. But I think that makes a ton of sense. All right. So if you were in charge, what would you do? While experience and education certainly plays a role in believing you're more qualified than your boss, only 41.9% and 40.6% of respondents cited experience and education, respectively, as their reason behind this belief. Instead, the top reason employees gave for believing they were more qualified than their boss were their people skills or a better understanding of day-to-day responsibilities. So let's take a look at this. Why do you believe you're more qualified than your current manager? So I'm going to make the assumption that this was a question that they only asked of those 21% of people who said they were more qualified. I have better people skills. I kind of think that overlaps with I have a better personality as well. What they're probably saying is just people like working with me. I'm easier to work with. I'm more approachable, that sort of thing. 56% of them, I have better people skills. Okay. I would be interested to know how many of those people are actually in manager positions. I think we can make the assumption it's more than a few of them, because again, this higher percentage of people in manager positions believing they're more qualified. I have a better understanding of the day-to-day work. Again, I'm going to emphasize on this one, you don't necessarily know all the stuff your boss is doing. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but to say that 50% of people say they have a better understanding of the day-to-day work, I'm going to make the assumption that at least a good chunk of that doesn't really understand the extent of the work that their boss is doing. I have a better work ethic, 45%. Again, you don't know all the things your boss is doing. I'm more experienced. Okay. This is one that really, more experienced in what sense? You have more experience as a manager, you have more experience in your industry, you have more experience with the specific day-to-day work. I think that needs a little bit, I need more information on that one, because if it's just, I'm 20 years older and I have 15 years more experience, I don't really think that means that you're better or more qualified than your boss. It just means you have more experience. I have better ideas. Well, that's subjective. I'm more educated. Oh my God. Okay, guys, let's have a talk. And I can say this again, like I've got a PhD. I have a lot of education. I have a master's degree, I have a bachelor's degree, I have a PhD, I have like all this stuff, right? Your education does not make you more qualified than your boss. I don't care how many years, I don't care if you have 20 PhDs, I don't care. It doesn't make you more qualified than your boss because it may not be a direct translation. In school, they do not teach you how to manage people. They don't teach you how to be the boss. They teach you theory and all this academic stuff. It may not even, like, listen, what you studied in school may not even be applicable to the work that you're doing. So I think that that's a bit of a throwaway. If you think you're more qualified than your boss because you're more educated, I'm gonna make fun of you a little bit. I'm gonna admit I'm more motivated. That's probably true. Listen, man, being a boss is hard, and a lot of bosses get a little haggard over time with all the stuff that they have to deal with. So it can be a lot easier for someone working underneath them that doesn't have all that additional responsibility to perceive that they're more motivated. I totally get that. Top 15 workplace changes employees would make if they were in charge. I do wonder again if they asked this. I think they probably asked this one of everyone. Create goals for employees. The number one change people would make is creating goals for people. I'm sorry, like, what are you guys doing if you don't have goals? That just makes no sense. Do you not have a performance review? If you do have a performance review, what are people judging you on if not goals? I don't get that one at all. Increase employee pay. Well, you think you would. Bosses don't always have that much leeway in increasing their employee pay. That might not even be something that they have any say over. Foster team bonding. I think that's a great suggestion. I think a lot of teams should do more at that. Focus on improving office culture. Again, depending on what position you have, what team you're on, bosses may not even be able to influence that all that much. Give employees bonuses. Again, bosses may or may not even have any influence in that area. A lot of times, especially with this like HR stuff, the administrative stuff, people think that bosses and managers have a lot more leeway a lot of times than they actually do. They may have some leeway, but really not these decisions usually aren't solely theirs to make. Upgrade workplace technology. Usually that's not something bosses really can control. Roll out new initiatives. That's really broad in general, and it's too general to even assess here. Meet more frequently with employees. Yes. I agree with this 100%. Bosses should be meeting weekly, one-on-one with every single person that reports to them. I don't care. Yes, you have time. If you do not have time to give everyone who reports directly to you 30 minutes of FaceTime on a weekly basis, you are either taking on too much and acting more as an individual contributor than you are in a manager role, or you have too many people reporting to you and you need to add some hierarchy there. So I 100% agree with this one. I think most managers are not meeting enough with their employees. Hire employees, yeah, maybe they can do that, maybe they can't. Decrease micromanagement. This is only 18% of people, so yeah, I think that makes sense. We don't have a huge percentage of people, and I oftentimes think employees perceive their bosses to be micromanaging when they're really not. We need more of a definition of micromanagement here. Schedule fewer meetings. Fire employees. Yeah, okay. Focus on getting new clients. That's not really, depending on the position, I suppose that's something a boss might do, but if the boss is focusing on getting new clients, guess what? Their team is focusing on getting new clients as well. Schedule more meetings, add health benefits. Health benefits is not really something that a lot of bosses have say on. That's usually like an HR thing. Schedule more meetings. Isn't that funny that 15.2% would schedule more meetings, 15.9% would schedule fewer meetings? Remote workers were 36% more likely than in-office employees to schedule more meetings if they were in charge. I totally get that. I work with a lot of teams that have a lot of remote employees or may be entirely virtual. The number one thing those teams want is to be communicating more with each other. And listen, technology makes this a completely doable thing. So many great video conferencing tools. Zoom is phenomenal. Zoom can really help you facilitate those employee meetings. So especially if you have remote workers, try to over communicate rather than under communicate. If your employees tell you you're over communicating, then you're probably communicating enough. All right, let's see. Swapping styles. Aside from more drastic changes like salary increases, 55.2% of employees would also employ a different management style if they were in charge. Okay, rather than 44.8% that would employ a similar management style. I mean, listen, every manager, just like work style, I talk about work style all the time, how people have different preferences and tendencies that they bring with them to work, and everyone has strengths and everyone has challenges. Same thing with management style, man. Different management styles exist for different employees. Every management style has strengths. Every management style has challenges. Some things that a manager might do really well, if you have a different management style, you might do that thing really poorly. So, I tend to think that the best management style is one that can easily adapt to other styles, can push outside their comfort zone when it's important. I don't think there is any one best management style that exists. The majority of employees reported that their manager currently uses a consultative approach, whereas managers may consult employees but ultimately make the final decision. That sounds pretty legit. However, 20% of managers reportedly used a democratic style of managing, and while 44.8% would employ a similar strategy as their managers, 37.4% would choose a consultative approach, and 30.3% would adopt a democratic management style. There are a lot more managements, these are really, if this is all people were given in this survey to be able to say, I would use this management style over that one, there are a lot of other management styles or a lot of other nuanced management styles outside of these. So, whatever. I mean, I'm going to take this one with a grain of salt. I do think it's interesting that employees who believe they're more qualified than their manager were nearly 4 times more likely than their counterparts to have an autocratic approach. Let's see what they say about autocratic approach. Manager has absolute power and ultimately makes decisions unilaterally or without much or any input from subordinates. I think, what's funny is that sometimes people perceive that managers have an autocratic approach when in fact managers consult you more than you might think. They might consult you in different ways. They might ask you in a one-on-one meeting. They might ask you in a team meeting for ideas. Oftentimes, what happens in a lot of these meetings, though, is that managers ask for your input. They ask for your feedback, and you don't say anything. And I don't say you as a person, you watching this video, but just as a general rule, the team doesn't really give a lot of input. And so if you're not giving input into what your boss is doing, then specifically when you're asked for it, then how can you expect them not to have that autocratic approach? All right, going above and beyond. There are company positions for a reason, and undermining a superior is typically never a good idea. Well stated, Resume Lab. But when an employee feels more qualified than their manager, resisting doing what one thinks is best can be difficult. 13% of employees admitted to subverting their manager, but the reasoning behind the move was largely positive. Over 42% of employees who subverted their manager did so to save time, while nearly 40% did so to help a coworker. So let's see, 13% of their employees had subverted a manager. Reasons for subverting a manager: to save time. All right. I also wonder, how are they really defining subverting here? Is it just doing something differently than the manager has suggested? And in a lot of times, I could actually see circumstances where a manager would suggest doing something a certain way, but then employees decide to do it a different way. And as long as you achieve the goal, the manager is probably going to be cool with that. If you achieve the goal, maybe you even come up with a way that's even better to do it. It might be okay. I don't know. I would necessarily classify that as subverting. To help a coworker, to avoid confrontation. Confrontation isn't always a bad thing. 36% of people said that. To help a client, 36% of people said that. To help the company, to go with my gut. Hey, I actually, listen, I appreciate people saying to go with my gut instinct. Your gut instinct is something to be trusted. It's there for a reason. Generally speaking, your gut instinct is your brain processing a lot of information on a subconscious basis, delivering you an answer. It's not necessarily telling you how it got there. Usually your gut instincts tend to be correct. So I can totally appreciate that. To save money. Ooh, here's where we're getting into danger territory. My manager ignored my ideas, so I just went and did it anyway. Sometimes it can work out for you, sometimes it doesn't. to let my manager see I subverted my boss so they could see how frustrated I am with them. I bet that didn't work out so well. To help my manager, I subverted my manager to get my manager fired. Hey, listen, less than 5% of people said that. So I can appreciate that. And other. Have you ever lied to your manager? 73.4% of people say yes. Remote workers were 24% likely than in-office employees to lie to their manager. Oh my God. Listen, guys, like, and actually, I place the blame. If you are lying to your boss, I actually place the blame on your boss because they obviously have not done enough to create an environment where you trust them, where you trust that you can tell them the truth, you can deliver them bad news, and it's going to be okay. So if you have employees that have lied to you, managers, that's your fault. You need to go back and start grounding your relationships in trust and making sure they feel safe coming to you with the truth. If they experience repercussions from delivering you bad news or news you don't want to hear, then that's your fault. I'm not going to completely dismiss the employees. They shouldn't be lying to their bosses, but I'm putting the onus on the people in the power position on this one. Let's see. Well, nearly 3/4 of employees said they never lied to their manager. Remote workers were a bit riskier with the truth. Out-of-office employees were 24% more likely to lie to their manager compared to their in-office counterparts. Of course, telling a lie over the phone or through email is much easier than face-to-face with a manager. But unless there's a good reason for lying, honesty is the best policy. So Resume Lab's being responsible for here and telling you don't lie to your boss. Toxic workplaces. Let's see. Workplaces are toxic for various reasons, but nearly 16% of employees cited their manager as toxic to the workplace. 1 in 10 employees also filed a formal complaint against their manager. While claiming more qualification is not necessarily a good enough reason to complain about a manager to human resources or higher level executives, a manager making a workplace toxic is a solid reason to take action. I do wonder how they're defining toxic workplace here, and to be honest with you, I'm actually surprised the numbers are that low. When we look at workplace bullying statistics, it's somewhere around like 40%. I mean, it really ranges. I've seen studies all the way from like 26% on a low end of people who've experienced workplace bullying, all the way up to like 99% in some studies. I think the 99% is too high. I don't believe that one, but I think the 26% is a little bit low. The studies I've really liked, I've seen it around 40%. And most of those come from the boss, not all of them. You can be bullied by a peer. You can also be bullied by a subordinate, so it doesn't always come from the boss. But I do wonder what they mean by that, a toxic workplace. Salary and satisfaction. Let's see. The survey found that employees who thought they were more qualified than their supervisors were less likely to be satisfied at work. That makes sense. If you think your boss is not as competent as you are, you're less likely to be satisfied. Compared to 87.7% of employees who didn't believe they were more qualified, only 62.7% of those who did say they were satisfied with their job. So let's see. Percentage of employees who are satisfied with their job so if they're satisfied with their job, they 62.3% of them believe they're more qualified than their manager, and 87.7% believe they're not. Percentage of employees who are productive during a normal working day, 71.9% think they're more qualified than their boss. Isn't that interesting? The people who are more productive during a normal working day, 70% of them believe they're more qualified than their boss, I guess, if I'm reading this correctly. Our percentage of employees who are satisfied with their annual salary, 53.9% believe they're more qualified than their manager, whereas 68.5% believe they're not qualified than their manager. And isn't this interesting? So the average annual salary, just in general, is around $46,000, but it's higher for people who believe they're more qualified than their boss. I wonder if this salary differential really goes back to confidence and not being afraid to negotiate and not being afraid to ask for what you want. Whereas if you don't believe you're more qualified, maybe you're going to be less likely to negotiate. All right. How do you really feel? A lack of satisfaction may not lead many to speak up, though. While 21% employees describe their boss as a micromanager, 18% feel their manager was always absent, nearly 56% wouldn't tell their boss how they truly feel about them. Well, if you think you're more qualified than your boss, it's, to be frank, probably like not the best idea in the world to tell them. Let's see. 21% of employees describe their boss as a micromanager. 18% of their employees feel their manager is never around. I'm like surprised that 18% is so low. I would have thought that would be more. Nearly 46% of employees were comfortable giving their manager feedback. Hey, I mean, listen, that's really good. Giving your manager feedback is not an easy thing to do. So 46% of people feel comfortable giving their manager feedback. I think that's a really good thing. Would you ever tell your boss how you truly feel about them? 55% said no. Do you plan on quitting your job in the next year? 75% said no, they're good. By perceived qualification, okay, so if you are planning on quitting your job in the next year, 48.8% believe they're more qualified than their boss. All right, so that makes sense. They're moving on to the next level, whereas 18% of them just want to leave their job. They're good. Moving up, every employee wants a resume filled with experience, showing off their qualifications, Feeling more qualified than a superior can cause employees to undermine their managers, submit a formal complaint, or even quit their job. I'm not sure I would come to that conclusion per se. I mean, obviously there are differences, and we're seeing here specifically, I mean, there's a pretty big differential between people who are quitting because they believe they're more qualified and people who aren't. I don't know that I would necessarily come to the conclusion that if you feel more qualified, you're significantly more likely to do these things. I mean, some of these things are completely separate then from feeling you're more qualified than their boss. All right, let's take a look at their methodology and limitations, because this is usually important for any study. For this project, we issued online questionnaires to 1,000 Americans using Amazon's Mechanical Turk. I have no idea what that is. Of the 1,000 people surveyed, 49% identified as women, 50% were men, 0.3% identified as neither. The majority of respondents, 62% were millennials, 27% were Gen X, only 8% were baby boomers, and 2.9% belonged to either Generation Z or Silent Generation, which is like way old. To qualify for the survey, participants were required to be employed and reported to a supervisor. To ensure that respondents took the survey seriously, we administered an attention check question. All right. Those who failed to identify and correctly answer the question were ejected from the survey. That's good. Outliers were removed where appropriate. Specific with annual salary was questioned. All of the survey, the campaign's main limitation is that the data relies on self-reporting, and possible issues with self-reported responses include but are not limited to the following: bias, recency, attribution, exaggeration, and telescoping. All right, so those are pretty legit qualifications. You always want to be careful with self-reported data, but I think overall this study is really interesting. I actually think that this is actually, I actually feel good about the results here. You know, if we were to see a study in which most people thought they were more qualified than their boss, that would present a much larger problem than what we're seeing here. What I see here is that, yeah, there are some people that think they're more qualified than their boss, but for most people, they're in an okay position. And I think that that's really good news for a lot of managers and employees.